Here we go.
All right, welcome to class 7. Today we're going to be talking about field section, harvest, your harvest containers, field packing and handling, some post-harvest stuff, transportation, equipment, maintenance. So sounds like a lot, but I feel like it won't be too painful. So again, just listing out some of the things that we're going to cover today. The main things being the pre-harvest, harvest, and post-harvest, and then some of the topics that fall underneath those categories. Okay, so starting with pre-harvest risk assessment. A risk assessment is required for field operations, pre-harvest, and harvesting section. The assessment will identify potential hazards on the farm that could impact the safety of the product. So, this will be documented in your risk assessment that you have done or will do soon with someone from North Shore EVP. There will be some language also in your farm food safety plan of your written policy on how you mitigate those things. And then there will also be a section in your harvest log under the pre-harvest section that will hit on these things as well. So you're meeting this criteria basically in 3 different forms. So pre-harvest risk assessment, we use information gathered with the risk assessment that you have with your North Shore EVP member. And then again, as I mentioned, the pre-harvest log on Heavy Connect is proof to the auditor that you're following these procedures that are listed out in your farm plan. So again, these 3 right here, your risk assessment, that's where we identify what the risk is and list out some of the mitigations that you could do. Written policy, this is going to be in your farm food safety plan. And then there's the pre-harvest checklist with some questions that you'll answer before you harvest. Again, meeting all the mandatory criteria for this. The pre-harvest risk assessment will be performed. As I mentioned, it is mandatory. And again, this is in your harvest log on Heavy Connect. So if you haven't seen it yet, when you go into your harvest log, there is a pre-harvest section that must be completed. And it's just basically some quick, mostly yes or no questions. Um, Walking around the farm, making sure that there's no feces on the product or flooding, standing water, things like that. And again, this record is how the auditor knows that you are following the procedures that are listed in the risk assessment and on your farm plan. And then, so these are just kind of some examples of possible risks. For physical, there's dust that could be blowing from the road. Chemical, if you're near some other farms, there could be spray drift coming from those farms. And then biological, some animal feces in the field. So these things you should have talked about or will talk about in your risk assessment meeting. And then again, we will help identify ways to mitigate these risks. And your pre-harvest assessment, it's really a question. Before you harvested, did you check for issues that may occur that would contaminate the product? So I feel like this is something everyone is doing naturally anyway before they're harvesting. They're looking around their farm, they're looking for things that might be a potential issue to the safety of their food. You're keeping an eye out for animal feces or tracks or evidence that animals have been there, keeping an eye on standing water, flooding, things like that. So again, this is a really quick checklist in your pre-harvest section that falls under the harvest log. And then some just things to keep in mind. Looks aren't everything, but field cleanliness can be a giveaway to issues in the operation. So if you look at the picture on the left, this could raise and the right, this could raise a few questions for an auditor, like, first of all, what is all this rubbish? Could you be harboring pests here? I think that's probably the number one thing that comes to mind is this looks like a great home for some mice or some rats or things like that. So I know farms can get messy, but you want to try to be as neat and clean as possible, and not have big piles of rubbish like this on your farm. The middle picture is nice because it looks neat. There's no rubbish laying around. The hoses are, coiled up. So you want to aim for this type of farm as much as possible, and try to get rid of the rubbish piles if you've got them. A big one to note is harvest bins must be kept off of the ground. This is mandatory, and I've heard some farmers say, like, yeah, this is silly because the crops grow from the ground, but you know what? It is what it is. There's different ways you can keep them off the ground. So I've seen a few farmers just double stack their harvest bins. So you can have one on top, that's where all the product is going to go in, and then it sits inside of another one, and that other one can touch the ground. But that one on top that's holding the product is not touching the ground. There's something like this. I've seen harvest bins on top of rolling carts, and they roll the carts kind of down the aisles. Um, a different, there's multiple ways you can get around this, and you can just talk with your North Shore EVP member to come up with some creative ways to make sure that your harvest bins are not touching the ground. Okay, water and ice in harvest and post-harvest operations. So if you use water or ice in your harvest or post-harvest process, most of this section is mandatory. You must have a written plan and records for your operations, harvest, and pre and post-harvest water use. So some SOPs, or in the written plan, it must address the water quality standards. So anytime you're dunking your produce, you're washing your produce, things like that, the water that's touching the produce must be microbial clean and meet drinking water standards. So if you are washing and dunking, things like that, we'll have a good SOP written in your plan, and make sure that we have all the information needed. If you are dunking and having multiple batches come through the water, you'll want to note how often do you change that water? When do you change the water? Does it need to be a certain temperature for certain produce? Things like that. So this is all good information that will need to be addressed in your farm plan. So maintenance of water delivery system. This is a record that's typically done annually. It could be more if you want, but it's basically just a check of your water delivery system. So going through checking pipes, making sure they're not rusty, there's no cracks, leaks. Does it look like it's about to burst? Things like that. You're going to want to walk around and check everything, make sure everything looks good. Something that I've recently learned from an external audit is that if you have any sort of maintenance done on your water delivery system, you're going to want to hang on to those receipts, documents, invoices, anything like that. In the app, you can upload documents, and so that's something that's really good to have to show proof that you are taking care and maintaining the water delivery system, and it will not pose a risk to your produce. And if you have a DIY hand washing station, you'll want to come up with a schedule on when you actually clean that tank that's holding the water for washing your hands. So for containers, bins, and packaging, the written policy must include the storage of your harvest container bins. So just thinking through right now, where are they stored? How are they stored? Are they off of the ground? Are they covered? Are they in a place where animals and birds and things aren't going to be able to crawl all over them or poop on them? Things like that. You'll want to make sure they're stored in a relatively clean and safe environment to not um, pose any risk to your produce. Um, and then you'll want to inspect the food contact containers as well, again, prior to your harvest. So this is part of your pre-harvest log that falls under the harvest record in Heavy Connect. Did you check your containers to be sure no animal droppings, dust, debris, things like that are present before you put your produce in? Again, I think these are things that everyone is mostly just doing. It's common sense. You're looking in your harvest bin before you're dropping your produce in there, and if you see poop, basically, yep, don't put your produce in there. So, um, kind of common stuff sense there. Um, so what are acceptable product containers and how did you decide on these containers? Are they an industry standard? What types of uses are prohibited? Do you restrict certain containers for only harvesting? So, the auditor will verify by observation whether or not these practices are followed in practice as they are written in the plan. So whatever's in your plan, you'll want to make sure that's what's actually happening on the farm. So these things really need to match. So if you decide to change your harvest bins or use something different, just be sure to let us know so we can change this in the farm plan, and there are no surprises. I think the next slide shows some examples. Yeah. So these are some harvest bin examples that are acceptable. Plastic bins, even laundry totes, anything like this. You just want to make sure that it's a material that could be cleaned and sanitized. So plastic, this can be cleaned and sanitized and air dried. Obviously, you don't want anything that's going to absorb water or moisture or things like that. So you can be pretty creative with your harvest bins. Um, So field packing and handling, product that is visibly damaged, contaminated, or decayed should not be harvested. Product that comes into contact with the ground should not be harvested unless it's normally comes in contact with the ground. So, for example, potatoes, things that come from the ground, that's different. But if you're harvesting and you drop something on the ground, do not put that back into your harvest bin with all your other clean product. Um, we did have a farmer do that, and that's a big no-no. Actually, I think this is an example that their farm employee just did not know the policies and the rules on the farm, and so they did that, and that was a big ding, because that is a big no-no. So if you have product that falls on the ground, we'll come up with a procedure on what you do at the end of your harvest with that product, or where do you put it? Is it put in a certain bin that says discard, something identified, to where everybody on the farm knows, okay, this is not going to be sold. This needs to be discarded somehow. So that's an important one. These are both mandatory policies for any food safety certification program and are suggested best practices even if you are not obtaining certification. So just keeping that in mind. So here in this picture, they have a discard policy sign hanging on the wall in that red circle, which is great. Auditors love signs, so this is perfect. It's right there for all of the farm workers to see. If you have any farm workers that don't speak English, you'll want to have, signs in their language that they can read and understand. And then here you see that the harvested product is in baskets that are on tables up off of the ground. So again, you never want to set your harvest bins with product or harvest bins at all touching the ground. So this is a great picture to just show some best practices from one of the farms.
I think this one's me now. Okay, guys, so we're going to continue on talk about containers, bins, and packaging with a little bit more specificity. So, a couple things that the standard requires. Ingrid already touched on. Obviously, you're going to inspect your containers before you use them and make sure that if there is anything in there that you re-clean or choose another container. One thing that comes up sometimes is whether it's acceptable or not to wipe down product with a cloth or a towel. It's not recommended, but you can do it as long as you have an SOP that prevents cross contamination. So if you are choosing to wipe down, we have a farm where we saw this happening. They were doing star fruit. You just need to have a way to dip your cloth or towel into a sanitizing solution to make sure that you're preventing that cross contamination from piece of fruit to piece of fruit. Another option might be to utilize paper towels and just use a single use product, but that's pretty wasteful. So a lot of people prefer not to go that route. Whatever you decide to do, if you do use cloth or towels to wipe your product as you're prepping it, We're going to write that out in your farm plan and make sure that we're specific about the policy that you're using on cross-contamination prevention. Packaging must be appropriate for the commodity and must be food grade. This one comes up because it does require a little bit of explanation. And what we're looking for there is how did you determine or choose the packaging that you're going to be using? It sounds like there's a lot to unpack here that you have to write out, but really what they're looking for is just a simple explanation like, my customer or my buyer wants me to use this type of packaging, or it's an industry standard. So I'm using these round clamshells because that's what the industry uses for lettuce. So very simple. It doesn't have to be a long thesis about why you chose this particular packaging, but you do want to make sure that it is food grade. And so when you purchase your packaging, there should be some specs on it that are either listed or available online, and we'll just look for that. So when we talk with you about your post-harvest in particular and the packaging that you're using, we're going to want to get some information about that, like what is the name of it, where are you buying it from, is there a number, like a model number or something like that on the label, so that we can look that up. And again, it's pretty simple to explain how you determine this. It's really going to be something like it's an industry standard or the buyer asked for this type of packaging. You will also want to include a written policy that determines or outlines whether or not the packaging can touch the ground. So as you're packing your product, is this something that's acceptable to be on the ground? And if so, are you going to also have some kind of buffer? So maybe you're packing tomatoes right into cardboard boxes, and they're going to be picked up by the distributor. Do you need a physical buffer? Maybe you don't necessarily need one, but I would recommend that you have one so that that packaging is not, again, directly touching the ground. So we want to prevent that as much as possible. Also, understanding what the prevailing industry standards are is important. Sometimes there are practices in place that are just happening because that's how across the board it's done. One good example of that is bananas. When they're harvested, they're typically laid on a trailer, and oftentimes some kind of soft material is used to prevent them from bruising. So that's an industry standard. We still want to make sure, though, that we're being appropriate and food safe in the selection of what that material is going to be. Good example of proper storage of harvest bins. This came from a farm on Oahu. You might be able to tell who it is, actually, and I'm looking at the box. But what you can see here are harvest bins that are not in use, that are shrink wrapped here, and they're sitting up on top of pallets. And then you can see product that looks like it might have just come in from the field here in these ones that are closer to the forklift. And you can see a box here as well. So most important things to note here is that the harvest bins that are not in use are pretty well protected. They're stacked off the ground, which is the most important thing, and they're in a covered space. You don't have to have a dedicated covered space for your packaging, but you do want to keep it out of the elements. So if you don't have a covered space to put it, you can create a cover with a tarp or some other kind of material. You absolutely want to keep it off the ground. So old pallets is a great way to do this. And you can also see here that the product that they brought in is actually stacked as well. And it looks like, looking at these bins, they are designed for stacking on top of each other. That's an important piece that we'll talk about too, making sure that you're not stacking things that don't belong stacked on top of each other. They are specifically designed. So if that's the case, there are certain types of boxes, flat boxes for tomatoes, for example, that are designed to sit on top of each other and provide a little bit of space so that the tomatoes underneath aren't getting squashed. So that's what you really want to be aware of. And again, another reason why we say don't put your packaging and your bins right on the ground. If you start to stack them, we don't want contamination to happen to the product that is underneath. If you absolutely do have to stack as you're harvesting, a couple best practice suggestions. If you can use a wagon or a cart, something that you can pull or attach to a gator so that you can easily move those stacks. again, we just want to try to keep things off the ground as much as is possible. That helps to reduce contamination, but it's also a practice to reduce some of the cleaning that would have to take place if you are doing that. Some other ideas, Ingrid mentioned using extra bins so that you can put one inside the other so that when you're harvesting, your harvestable bin is not touching the ground. Some ways to do that, you could have different color bins, just spray paint something, label them, not for harvest, so people know these are the ones that we harvest into, these are the ones that are spares that go underneath. So just a good way, again, the organization is really key because that shows the auditor that things are thought out and are in practice versus an auditor possibly wondering, oh, did you use the same harvest bin on the ground there that you used to harvest into earlier? So just again, kind of thinking through how can you make your practices obvious, transparent, and efficient. Another idea is putting a tarp on the ground. If you do want to put your bins on the ground as you're harvesting, sometimes for things that are closer to the ground, we're kneeling, it makes more sense to do that. Having a tarp or some kind of canvas, something that you can clean easily and that's not too expensive is a good way to kind of get around that. In this picture, it's kind of hard to see, but in the middle here is a farmer. This is on Oahu as well. Whoops, sorry, I just advanced. And let me see if I can go back. You can see that he's holding his harvest bin here as he's harvesting. So this one, maybe not ideal if you have a lot of harvesting to do, but for a small harvest could be possible. So he's resting it on his knee as he's picking. Just to say that there's lots of different ways to go about this. So looking at your harvest log, since we're talking about harvesting, one of the things that we want to stress is that accurate, complete information is really useful here. Again, these harvest logs are a really important part of a recall or trace back, trace forward exercise. So we want to make sure that they're being filled out, ideally when the harvest is occurring or right there afterwards, with as much detail as possible. So the date of harvest, this is a must-have. We can't effectively do a recall if we don't know the date things were harvested. Location, of course, this is where your field identification is going to come in. We talked about that a few weeks ago. What was harvested? Obviously, very important. And this is something that we can create drop downs for you. So ensuring that you provide us with enough information to list out all the crops that may be harvested on the farm. We can always add them too, so don't hesitate to send us an email if you need that changed. How much of it was harvested? So this is an important one because we want to get down to what are the units that you're harvesting and sending, particularly sending product out in. When we first started doing this work, a lot of times we had farmers who said, oh, you know, I've got bunches of onions, but what is that exactly? We need to have a little bit better understanding of what is a bunch. Is it about a half a pound? Is it 5 onions? So understanding that, ideally, it's something that is measurable in pounds. But if you use another way of quantifying your harvested amount, then just let us know and we'll try to work with that. And of course, we've got space here for your lot or tracking code, which we talked about, Julian calendar, or just making up some kind of code that you can remember easily. We're going to talk briefly about the post-harvest handling and storage. This is a little bit in the field section of our field scope of the audit. It does touch on what happens after you've completed your harvest, just a little bit. This is not the actual post-harvest scope, which is much longer and much more involved. But in post-harvest handling, when we're in the field scope, it does ask some questions about how are you handling your product. So we're going to write some of this into your farm plan because these are mandatory criteria. The first one is to note that the produce is handled in such a manner that it is not likely to become contaminated. This one seems obvious. So you're not going to be walking on your product or stepping in it. This comes up not so much on our farms because farms in Hawaii tend to be pretty small, but on the mainland, some of these larger operations, in particular where they grow things like melons and cantaloupes, it is common practice to walk on the product when it's in the trailer or the wagon. So we want to make sure that we're just noting that here. It is a mandatory criteria, and that's why it's in there because of these larger size operations that do that. Materials coming into contact with produce shall be clean and in good repair. So this goes back to making sure, again, that you do a once over of all of your materials as you're starting your harvest. Does everything look good? You're going to do the same thing when you go to do your post-harvest tasks. So are your bins, if you're transferring product into a new bin or tote, are they clean? Are your pallets in good shape? They're not broken. They're not protruding pieces of wood that might cause a problem and end up poking your product or putting debris into it. And then storing your products separately from chemicals that may pose a hazard. This one seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes on small farms, we're squeezing a lot of tasks, a lot of things into one small space. So just make sure that your chemicals are not stored anywhere near where you're doing your post-harvest tasks. You want to make sure everything that's chemical related is properly stored away, has containment, and isn't going to be a potential risk or contaminant to your product. Post-harvest cleaning and sanitizing. I feel like we say this every couple of classes, but just a reminder, you have to clean before you can sanitize. So when you're going through after harvest, you've done your post-harvest tasks, you want to go through and clean everything and sanitize everything that you can. So anywhere that product can touch, whether that's tables, bins, sinks, etc., any tools that you might have used, clean and sanitize everything. And of course, you want to record that, right? So it's important to write that down or note that in Heavy Connect. And again, going back to talking about, organization, it carries through from the field to your post-harvest area. So if you make sure that your trash is contained, you're organized, so your tools, everything has its own place. It's easy to put things away, easy to find them once you need them the next time. That goes a long way to sort of settling an auditor's observations like, okay, everything looks good here. They've got it under control. I can easily see things that are clean versus things that are not. It really helps a lot with just ensuring that you're able to move forward in your day from one task to another. In the post-harvest section, because we do talk a bit about sanitizers, we do want to remind folks that if you're using a sanitizer on your food contact surfaces or even in your water, make sure that it is labeled. So anything that you're using on food contact surfaces, it should have a little saying on the label somewhere that says that. So sometimes it'll be specific and it'll say, like this one does, to sanitize food contact surfaces. That's what you want to be looking for. Follow the dilution rates that are listed on the label. We're going to put this information into your farm plan too. If this is a sanitizer that you use regularly, it's part of your normal rotation. We're going to write that as an SOP. And again, that comes right off the label. One thing to note, we have had a few times folks ask about using vinegar as a sanitizer. It's not recommended, and that's just because it's not reliable as a sanitizer. It does come up. There are some concentrations where it's very high, and sometimes people do use it. If your farm is using vinegar or wants to use vinegar, we'll spend some time talking about what might be acceptable concentrations. But overall, we recommend that you find something else if possible, just because it's not reliable, and sometimes getting the concentration that might work is difficult here in Hawaii. So again, if you're unsure, we can talk through this. Some ideas on what you might be able to use for sanitizing. Of course, bleach is affordable. It's everywhere. You can find it typically pretty easily. As long as you're not using it on the food product itself, it should have on the label that you can use it for food contact surfaces. So again, follow the label for how you're going to dilute that. Other sources or other types of sanitizers, you can check Ecolab. They've got some as well listed on their website. Sanidate 5.0 is another one that is available here in Hawaii. It is kind of expensive, but you use very little of it at a time, so it will last a long time. So it's a big upfront cost, but over time pencils out. And then Storox 2.0 is a hydrogen peroxide-based sanitizer. This is often a nice substitute for bleach if you don't want to use that. In organic operations, there are some other things that are available to you if there are certain conventional products that you don't want to use. So chlorine materials, hydrogen peroxide, ozone has become a little bit more popular, at least amongst the farms that we're working with. So there are some different ways to do that. There's actually a product like it's like a spray bottle called Nozo, I think, that one of the farms we were using worked with. So if you have questions about that, let us know. Peracetic acid and peroxyacetic acid, these are really good substitutes for vinegar. So vinegar, again, not always reliable, but PAA is a good product. Phosphoric acid, potassium hydroxide, and sodium hydroxide also listed for organic operations. I can't say that I know anybody using these things in particular, but it is available to you. And then touching on the post-harvest water, again, Ingrid talked a little bit about this already, but just as a reminder, if you're using water or ice in your harvest or post-harvest, it has to be microbially clean. So it has to have zero E. coli, zero detectable generic E. coli. And sometimes people will say, well, I don't wash my product, so I don't need to worry about post-harvest water, which is not correct because you should be cleaning. And so if you're cleaning either your food contact surfaces or your tools or just your hands, that is a use of post-harvest water. So you do want to make sure you have clean water on site for that. Thinking about what your water source is, you may have access to municipal water, and that's acceptable. If you don't, you may have to think about a little bit more deeply, how are you going to handle this? So what is your water source? If it's surface water, what risks are present there? You can't use surface water straight up for post-harvest tasks. So how are we going to deal with that? So maybe treating the water might work. You can also bring water to your site. So if you have a microbially clean source at home, a municipal water source, you want to bring it, we can do that. We are going to need to document the water quality at that source and make sure that we have a proper cleaning procedure for your container that you're bringing it in. Because once it leaves that location where you are getting it from, goes into a container, we want to make sure that it maintains cleanliness. And like I was saying, your post-harvest water could be treated if you need to achieve this quality standard. So again, that goes to if you have surface water, for example, you're going to need to come up with a plan on how you're going to treat that. Of course, that brings into play a testing schedule to make sure that it's effective. So the sanitizers or antimicrobials have to be labeled for this use, and we want to make sure that we're logging that. In addition, this is a really important place to read the label fully because sometimes certain chemicals, their effectiveness can be affected by the pH level of the water or the water temperature. So we just want to know, does the label say anything about that? And if so, then we'll deal with that next step. Another important criteria in this section is related to gloves. So glove use can be challenging when we're writing these farm plans because we don't always think about all the different places that you might be using gloves in your operation. You don't have to use gloves at all. It's not required like it is for food handling in a restaurant or something like that. However, if you do use gloves in any part of your operation, we need to know, we need to write this into the plan, and we want to explain why we're using it and what the procedure or SOP is around how we're using it, how the gloves are maintained, and how they're disposed of. Most importantly, gloves are not a substitute for hand washing. If you are using gloves in your operation and you have an audit, which you will, please make sure that before folks put gloves on, they are washing their hands. During the audit, the auditor will be looking at that, and they'll also be looking at how you are using the gloves and what happens afterwards. And again, this goes back to making sure that what's happening on the farm is going exactly as it's written in the farm food safety plan. So this is why we ask, do you use gloves in any part of your operation? What kind of gloves are they, and how are we using them? Most of the time it's disposable, so people are using them and then throwing them away. But you may have cloth or canvas gloves for certain tasks. And in those cases, we want to make sure that we have a procedure for keeping those clean and away from or reducing the risk of any contamination to product. So many times those cloth or canvas gloves are being used for tasks that are not related to handling product, but we just want to make sure that that's clearly stated if that is the case. And we do want to make sure that you have at least one employee training record to show that you explained the glove policy and use to your employees. So keep that in mind. Where am I, Ingrid? Oh, okay, I got two more. Transportation. Okay. Transportation is something that sometimes we don't really think about as being a part of a lot of small farm operations. We think about these big refrigerated trucks, and we have had operations say, oh, I don't have that, so this isn't applicable. But any way that you are transporting product, whether it's from the field to your own packing shed on the farm or to your buyer, this is applicable to you. So the couple things you need to think about. First, you want to make sure that your vehicle is clean and that you have records that show that. So ensuring that you have a simple procedure for cleaning out your vehicle that you're transporting in, whether that involves cleaning with a broom or cleaning and sanitizing, wiping things down, depends on what your vehicle is and how you're transporting it. But this is something that you do need to cover. Also, as you're transporting your product, you want to make sure that it's not subject to cross-contamination from dust, from things on the road, from birds flying over. So covering your product is really important. If you are transporting product, for example, in the back of a pickup truck, you want to make sure that you have something to tie down over your product to keep it from getting anything in it. And so closed boxes are not considered covered. USDA wants to see an additional layer of protection there. So using a tarp, using some kind of plastic liner, putting it inside the vehicle, those are all considered covered and are acceptable. And now we're going to talk a little bit about record keeping reminders, and we're winding down here. So if you do have questions, feel free to get those ready or put them in the chat. But a couple things just to touch on here as far as your record keeping. Now that you guys are familiar with Heavy Connect, hopefully getting really comfortable with using it, the records that you should be keeping daily, i.e. when the farm is open. So if you're on vacation or you're taking the day off, you don't need to keep this, but you want to make sure you fill out your daily GroupGAP and your bathroom log. Those, if anybody is on the farm working, those two things absolutely need to be filled out. And then cleaning and sanitizing. Typically, if you're on the farm for some reason, there's going to be something that you are cleaning. So make sure that that's in your head too. Just remember to clean, put that on your cleaning and sanitizing record. As we prepare you for an internal audit, this is a key piece for us. We're going to be looking at the number of records that you have in relation to, for example, your harvest schedule. So those things should line up. Every time you harvest, you should be doing a record. So if you tell us, oh, we harvest 3 times a week, we're going to be looking for records every month that are around 12 or so harvest records. Fertilizer and pesticides, of course, these are whenever you apply, doesn't need to be any more than that, shouldn't be any less. Dangerous incidents logs, these are for any time that you have an incident that might result in a problem or contamination to your product. So something spills, you see animal evidence in the field, something breaks, or somebody comes onto your farm. Anything like that would be a dangerous incident and could be put down on that log. Traceability and mock recall, this is an annual requirement. If you don't have this done before your internal audit, that's okay, but it will be a corrective action. And our goal is to make sure that you get these done every year before we have our external or USDA audits scheduled. Employee training. Whoops, sorry guys, went too far. Employee training should be robust. And what we mean by that is that there should be a good amount of employee training records. And that is for everybody on the farm that has anything to do with the product. We do have a series of videos. We sent out the link, but if you need it again, just let us know. It is a playlist, and our goal is to make one for every month of the year so that every month you would have something quick that you could watch and write down. Employee training can be very simple, though. It doesn't have to be videos. So if you just have a review of your glove policy during lunch one day, you can put that down as an employee training. And lastly, your water delivery system assessment. This is going to be done based on how often you say you're going to do it. It will be written in your farm plan. Typically, farms will say anywhere from quarterly to once a year, depending on your delivery system's age, complexity, etc. So keep those in mind, and I'm going to pass it to Ingrid.
Okay, so just continuing with some record keeping reminders. If an auditor sees a large gap in your records, this will be a cause for concern. So um, just making sure we're super consistent with the record keeping. We don't want to go into your Heavy Connect and see, a month of super solid records, and then for the next month, it's sparingly. It's like once every couple weeks. That doesn't look good, and it would be a corrective action if those records aren't consistent. So, not a huge fix. It's not a big deal, but you just want to get in the habit of keeping records regularly as much as possible. Um, if the setup or questions on Heavy Connect are not applicable to your operation, let us know because we can customize that. So we want to get rid of and cut out whatever does not apply to your farm and make it suitable for your specific farm as much as possible. And I like secretly truly enjoy doing this like so much. It just is like I want it to be as effective and efficient for you guys. So let us know if something doesn't work. And even farms that have been with us for years, we still are making edits to their Heavy Connect and finding ways to streamline things. So it's never like, oh, okay, we're done. Your Heavy Connect's good to go. We're constantly changing it and improving it and making it better, um, and just making it more, quicker and more efficient. So just let us know if you see something or have a question about something that you're like, oh, you know what, I think this can be combined with this, or you see something that could be cut or added. It's totally customizable. So just let us know. If there's certain things on your farm that would be easier to keep on Heavy Connect, let's say like you're having it done on paper right now and you want to streamline everything, we can create that. So, for example, a temperature log for your cold storage, we can create a record for that. For your monthly maintenance checks or yearly maintenance checks, we can create a record for that. Obviously sanitizing, cleaning and sanitizing your delivery logs. I'm trying to think of some other random ones that I've made. Water testing. I created a record for water testing. So instead of sending us the PDF, the farmer can now just upload the PDF through the app. And it's way quicker that way and it's more effective and efficient. So again, just let us know, if you see something that could be done better, then we will try our best to do that. So for homework, it's just keeping consistent records on Heavy Connect. If you have any assignments that you haven't turned in, please get those into us because we use that for your farm food safety plan. And we should be almost complete with everybody's risk assessments, but if not, your North Shore EBP farm lead will be reaching out to schedule those with you and start working on your farm food safety plan. And I think that's it for class today. Are there any questions or concerns?
Quick question. I haven't gotten to the delivery report on Heavy Connect yet. But my understanding is that on Heavy Connect, any of my vendors could access our records to see what we've been doing. Is that correct?
No, not like your buyers. You're asking if your buyers have access to your Heavy Connect?
Yes.
No.
I thought they had access to check the records to see what we were doing. That's not correct?
No. Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say you would have to send it to them. So you can send them a PDF of your any record that you have if they request it, and easily do that from Heavy Connect from the app. but they don't have access to your records right now. The only people who have access is you and us to see in there, and that's basically it.
And
We
USDA.
so USDA will be given restricted access if your farm is chosen for an external audit.
I
And
see.
we restrict that because we don't want them poking around in things that are not necessary to the audit. So we give them access only to certain things like your farm food safety plan to read it, and then any records that they need to see to complete the audit. Yeah.
And you'll be notified if that's you. If your farm is chosen, we will let you know and say at this date we're going to give them access so they can see, you know, X, Y, and Z records from your account. So we're not just sharing and giving information to them. It's very limited and for a certain period of time.
Good. Thank you for the clarification.
Sure. One thing we are working on that's not ready yet and is way down the line still, but we are working on a dashboard related to Heavy Connect where buyers would be able to communicate with you and you would be able to say, hey, I've got this product that I'm selling you. Here's an update on it. This is how much I expect to harvest, how much when I expect to have it ready, any pest problems, et cetera, but that's not ready yet. And again, would be restricted to, you know, you and the buyer only, nobody else. So one other thing too, I'll say about Heavy Connect, if you feel like you would like some in-person assistance with it to kind of get you over the hump and get you ready to use it or feel more comfortable with it, please reach out and let us know because we want everyone to use it. It's a significant perk. It costs a lot for big operations to use it, and we are getting it for free. And so we really want to utilize that and make it accessible as best we can. So if you would like help and you want one of us to come out and spend a couple hours working with you on it, we're more than happy to do that. Just reach out and let us know. We love an excuse to come to your farm. I'm gonna stop the recording.